What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and we were expecting a huge weekend in college football, and it did not disappoint. So many great games, so many playoff-changing games potentially that we saw this past weekend as there were, again, some huge games. Obviously, Clemson, Notre Dame, Florida, Georgia, the big two, but there was a lot more going on. The Pac-12, they began play, and we learned a lot about some other teams, especially in the Big Ten. So this was a really, really big weekend of college football. First full weekend, first weekend where every conference has joined the party. So we're going to give you the our five takeaways from Week 10, as it was, again, a very, very big weekend in college football. We have to start with the biggest game of the weekend. Our number one takeaway, Notre Dame, they are a playoff contender, but Clemson is still in control of their own destiny. So we start with Notre Dame. They were really impressive in this game against Clemson. I was trying to figure out if Notre Dame, how good they were. I knew this is a really good team. I've said it since the preseason. This is a top 10 team, but I wasn't sure if they were a top tier team, if they were a team that could maybe knock off a team like Clemson or Alabama or Ohio State. They proved that they could do that when they beat Clemson last night. Great game, double overtime game, 47-40. It was a pretty even game. I think turnovers really hurt Clemson early, and they got into a little bit too big of a hole that they just couldn't climb out of that hole. And despite the young quarterback playing really well for them, I thought one of the big differences in this game was running the football. Notre Dame had a lot more success than Clemson. Notre Dame's defense did really, really well against Travis Etienne in the run game for Clemson, and Notre Dame was able to run the football pretty effectively. Had a big run early in the game by Kyron Williams that really gave them a lot of momentum. So this is a huge win for Notre Dame. I know there are some out there that are going to say, well, Trevor Lawrence didn't play. Clemson was banged up on defense. If both teams were healthy, Notre Dame could not beat Clemson. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that Clemson is still probably the better team when both teams are 100%. I mean, again, Clemson, turnovers went against them. They were on the road. They still almost won this game. It looked like they might win it there late, but Notre Dame had that clutch drive at the end. But it's more for me like before this game, I would have told you if Clemson and Notre Dame played 10 times, Clemson would probably win 8 of 10 times. But after watching this game, I think it would be more like Clemson would win 6 of 10 times, because Notre Dame, I think, proved that they are in that category with the elite teams in college football. I know they've had some games where they've struggled, but every team really has had that so far. You look at Alabama against Ole Miss. You look at Clemson against Boston College, and even against Syracuse, they didn't play great against a bad team. So I'm going to go ahead and assume now that Notre Dame is absolutely in that top tier of teams. They are a playoff contender. But Clemson is still in control, because if they win out, Clemson will still make the college football playoff. I don't think there's really any doubt about it. They'll get another chance at Notre Dame more than likely, and they'll be back and healthy, hopefully. And the committee's going to look at this game and say no Trevor Lawrence, missing some key guys like James Skalski on defense, and they're going to probably put Clemson still in the college football playoff. Question for Notre Dame, if that happened, would be if Notre Dame loses and they play a close game against Clemson, does Notre Dame still get in the college football playoff? Of course, that's going to be a big story to watch. Notre Dame could lose. They still have to play a North Carolina team that I know has struggled at times, but they're still an explosive offense. I mean, there's no guarantee that Notre Dame's going to run the table. And there's no guarantee that Clemson's going to beat them when they play again. Notre Dame could win both matchups, and then Notre Dame obviously will be in the college football playoff, and Clemson will not. That is going to be, I think, a great game if they do wind up playing in a rematch, and I think more than likely they will. The only way that they would not would be if maybe Notre Dame does slip up somewhere and Miami is still there with one loss. Matter of fact, we might see Miami and Notre Dame in the ACC championship if that happened. Instead of, I don't know how that would work with the tiebreakers. I guess it would still be, Notre Dame and Clemson, because Clemson would have beaten Miami and Notre Dame would have beaten Clemson. I really don't know how that would work, because Notre Dame and Miami do not play. I wish those two teams played this year. It would definitely make things more interesting in this conference, but they don't play this year. But again, Clemson, they're still in control if they can win out. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this playoff race, as it looked like, we had 3 teams, and then, who else is going to sneak in there. But now it looks like maybe we have more than 3 really good teams. Texas A&M playing really, really well right now. Florida's playing really well. The college football race overall, it got a lot more interesting this weekend. And let's go back to Florida here. Our number 2 takeaway, Florida will win the SEC East. It would be a shock if they did not win. I mean, they would have to lose 2 more games. That's not going to happen. Florida will win the East. And I thought, based off of this game, they are good enough to play with Alabama. I don't know if they're going to beat them, but they have enough, I think, to play with Alabama and have a competitive game against Alabama in the SEC Championship, where we're assuming those 2 teams will meet. I think Florida is reminding me more and more of LSU from last year, and I said that early in the year. Then they lost to Texas A&M, and I kind of stepped back and said, well, maybe this team's not really that good. But they had a lot of injuries, and I don't want to make excuses. But they had a lot of injuries on defense, and Texas A&M's a really good football team. But Kyle Trask is just playing so well, and especially when Kyle Pitts is out there. You saw them drop off a little bit when he went out. Also got a little bit conservative, and that's one thing that I think was different about LSU last year. They never took their foot off the gas. They beat teams, and they just kept going and kept going. Florida got really conservative in this game. It almost cost them. If Georgia had even halfway decent quarterback play, this game probably would have been a 1-possession game. If they don't drop that interception in the 4th quarter, that would have been a pick 6 and make it a 1-possession game. You know, this game could have gone differently. If I was a Florida fan, I would have been a little bit concerned there at how conservative they went, because they almost let Georgia back in the game. But I guess that they thought their defense had it under control, and they did. Not only did Georgia's quarterback play, it was terrible in this game. Florida's defense played really well. This is the best game I think they've played all year defensively. And if you take out the pick 6 for Georgia and then the one big play on the first play of the game, Georgia only scored 14 points in this game if you take out those 2 plays. So this was a very good job by the Florida defense. If they can continue to get better on that side of the ball. Also, offensive line. They are so much better on the offensive line than they were really in the first couple of weeks of the season. They're starting to run the football better, and to be able to run the football against Georgia, you got to have good offensive line play. They were able to do that, and Florida now becomes a playoff contender, and it's going to be crazy if Florida beats Alabama, and let's say Clemson beats Notre Dame in a rematch. We're going to have a fight for that number 4 spot, and the committee might have a really hard time picking the 4 teams this year. And who knows, Ohio State could wind up getting upset somewhere along the way. We could have an undefeated Pac-12 team, and a lot of things could happen. This playoff race is definitely not clear, and now we don't even know for sure. I thought Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State were locks to get in. Now we don't even know if Clemson's going to get in, so that really makes that playoff race interesting. But my takeaway was that Florida is a really good football team, and Georgia needs to find a quarterback. That's really hurting them right now. All right, number 3, Michigan and Penn State. They're terrible, and Indiana is actually pretty good. And I know that kind of doesn't work like that, because you could say, well, the only reason Indiana won is if Michigan and Penn State are terrible. But Indiana, this is a good football team, and you can tell by watching them. They are now 3-0, and they're probably the second best team in the Big Ten this year, outside of Wisconsin and Northwestern, which we really don't know a whole lot about. Northwestern hasn't played anyone great, and Wisconsin hasn't either. They've only played 1 game, so you know, I don't really know a whole lot about those teams. But out of the teams that we really know for sure how good they are, Indiana is probably the second best team behind Ohio State. Michigan and Penn State, what's going on with these 2 teams? I mean, this was just a terrible performance by Michigan. They were dominated by Indiana. Penn State blown out by Maryland. These were supposed to be really good teams. Now, I predicted Michigan to have a down year this year. I said they might not even be a top 25 team going back to the preseason, but I did not expect this for Penn State. I thought Penn State was a top 10 team. They have, I don't know if it's a mental thing because they lost that game to Indiana, and then all of a sudden they're 0-2 after they lose to Ohio State. I don't know what happened to Penn State. No Micah Parsons on defense. No Journey Brown. He is out this year. So maybe it has to do with that leadership. I really don't know. But it's embarrassing because this Penn State team has a roster that should be one of the top teams in the Big Ten, and they're not getting it done. Just a terrible performance this weekend, as they are, again, 0-3. 0-3. A team that I thought was going to be a top 10 team is now 0-3. That was a big surprise. So how about we start playing the Pac-12? USC survives. I mean, just a crazy finish to this game. Had to get an onside kick. They come back. And, you know, I really thought USC was the better team as I watched this game. They just had everything go against them. Turnovers, the penalties, the big plays. It just seemed like everything was going Arizona State's way. Arizona State played a great game. I mean, they're a very good football team, don't get me wrong. but it just kind of felt like USC, they felt like this USC team's the better team. They're going to win this game. But Arizona State just kept making big play after big play, the timely plays, the plays they needed to win this game, except for one. They didn't recover the onside kick. USC made the play that they had to make late in the game to go down and win it, and USC will survive. So now they join Oregon as the 2 favorites in the Pac-12, and that's what I said preseason. I said these 2 teams will meet in the Pac-12 championship. Both teams might even be undefeated, but the thing for USC is that they don't really play anyone else the rest of the year. They should be able to win the rest of their games unless they have just a bad game. The schedule is not tough at all, and you look at the Pac-12 South, outside of Arizona State, there's really not much else there that I think is going to challenge USC. So they have a pretty clear path, I think, to the Pac-12 championship. In Oregon, they looked really good against Stanford. A little bit of a slow start. Young quarterback, had to settle in a little bit, but he wound up playing pretty well. And Oregon's defense played solid. They look like probably the best team in the Pac-12. I would say after this game, Oregon looks like the best team. But it's just week 1. We've learned in the other conferences that you've got to see more than one game out of these teams to really evaluate them. So we'll see what happens to the Pac-12. But right now it looks like USC and Oregon are on a collision course to meet in the Pac-12 championship. And how about the Big 12? We saw no upsets in the Big 12 for the first time all year. And I didn't go back and look this up, so maybe there was one week where there were no upsets. But I'm pretty sure there was one week where there was only like 1 or 2 games, so maybe that week. But for the most part, we've seen upsets every week in the Big 12. Not this week. All the favorites won, and every team was playing this weekend. Oklahoma took care of business. Texas survived against West Virginia in what was almost an upset. Kansas State almost upset Oklahoma State, but Oklahoma State survived. We saw Iowa State get down early. They come back and beat Baylor. And then also TCU beats Texas Tech. So this was the first week where all the favorites took care of business in the Big 12, and things are starting to settle down in this conference. Remember, it was chaos early on, just like I think the Pac-12 might be. But it started to settle down, and now we're back to thinking that it's Texas, it's Oklahoma, it's Oklahoma State, it's Iowa State. Those are the 4 best teams in this conference, which is what we thought coming into this season. And it's going to be really fun to see who winds up getting those top 2 spots, because I think we may have a 3 or 4-way tie at the top, which means it's going to come down to tiebreakers, which is going to be crazy this year in the Big 12. I don't know exactly how it's going to wind up, but we are starting to now see the teams that we thought were going to do well in this conference play at that level to where they are looking like the best teams in the Big 12, and it's going to be really fun. I don't really see a Big 12 team making it into the college football playoff, especially now that Notre Dame just beat Clemson. I don't really think there's much hope. If Oklahoma State runs the table, they might can get in. But I think that's going to be tough for them to do with still several tough games remaining on their schedule. But this was a quiet week in the Big 12 for once, as the college football playoff race continues to shape up, and it continues to look like the Big 12 is going to be left out. So we'll have more on that playoff race tomorrow. I'll have my new top 25, first top 25 poll with the Pac-12 included. So make sure you watch for that. Give me your takeaways from this weekend down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.